Hi, everybody. My name is Amelia Bono. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the co-founder and executive director of Shout Your Abortion. SYA is, oh, wow, Carrie Baker's already got a question. Carrie Baker just rearing to go. I'm going to X that out for now, but you just sit on that question. SYA is an organization that is working to normalize abortion and expand or elevate paths to access regardless of legality. And we make resources, campaigns, and media intended to arm existing activists, create new ones, and foster collective participation in abortion access all over the country. I'm so excited to welcome you to our 6th installment of Abortion Academy. These webinars are deeper dives into more nuanced topics within the abortion landscape. And each one of these monthly webinars is presented by one of our exceptionally brilliant colleagues whose work we really want to introduce to our larger audience. We hope that Abortion Academy will deepen your knowledge, propel your curiosity, help you connect some of the dots between issues you're navigating regionally and what's happening at the national and international level, and ultimately to give you fresh ideas to take back into your community. Audience members will be off camera and muted for security reasons, but we will have a format for you to ask questions throughout the presentation, which David will begin answering after about 30 to 45 minutes of speaking. We're really excited for you to ask questions in this particular Abortion Academy. I think that it is of utmost importance to understand what the law is, even if you intend to ignore it, and probably especially if you intend to ignore it. And so we hope that in the Q&A you will ask David what you're thinking about as you navigate your own participation in this movement in facilitating access in post-Dobbs America. Today we are hearing from David Cohen, who is a repro legal expert and a professor at Drexel University. David is the author of numerous books about abortion, including Living in the Crosshairs, The Untold Stories of Anti-Abortion Terrorism, and Obstacle Course, The Everyday Struggle to Get an Abortion in America. David is also co-author of an extremely informative law paper currently under review called Abortion Pills, which SYA really believes that everybody who is interested in this work and in abortion should read. This paper is essentially a survey of some of the legal strategies that are coming to define the post-Dobbs legal landscape. And I think really of the ways in which each side, both supporters of abortion access and those who seek to end or constrain abortion access, see pills as a sort of key to victory, meaning that those who oppose abortion know that they cannot stop abortion from happening as long as abortion pills are widely proliferated, and that supporters of abortion access know that the proliferation of pills is one of the key strategies to ensuring access post-Dobbs. So I'm going to hand it over to David to talk really about this paper as a jump off, and he and I are I'm going to kind of remain on the screen for this one and possibly jump in with some questions. And then David and I will start talking in about 30 to 40 minutes and having questions from the audience. So with that, take it away, David.
Thanks so much, Amelia, and everyone at Shout Your Abortion and everyone here. It's a real honor. I've been a fan of Shout Your Abortion almost from the moment Amelia first posted on Facebook and it went viral, and then very lucky to work with Amelia on the board of the Abortion Care Network for the past, 6 years, 7 years? Something like that.
Yeah, I think that it will be, it's 6 for me. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I'm wearing my throwback old SYA shirt from, Amelia reminded me, this is the 2016 version of an SYA shirt, and probably when you first came on the board and gave this to me. So it's a real pleasure to be here talking about this. And I just want to flag from the beginning that the work that I'm talking about and all the material that I'm referencing is work that I've done with 2 other law professors, both here in Pennsylvania, where I am, Rachel Rebouché, who's a dean at Temple Law School, and Greer Donley, who's a law professor at Pitt. the three of us have worked together for the past couple of years on a bunch of things related to the post-Roe environment. And this abortion pills work that is, I'm really going to be just sort of giving you a summary of what we did with this paper, because it covers all the things Amelia's talking about. It's very much a product of all three of us. So what I'm talking about, I certainly owe, the work is a real team effort. So this is also Rachel and Greer's work. And actually, I was thinking while Amelia was doing the introduction that so much of the framing of this, how we talk about abortion pills, and I think so many people talk about abortion pills, but really our paper and what I'm going to be talking about today comes from so many conversations with people like Amelia, talking about sort of just the liberatory promise of pills, and really not just promise, the reality that we're living in. And it makes me realize how the environment that we're in now, what are we now, 17 months post overturning of Roe v. Wade, if this had happened, say back in 1992, when everyone thought Roe was going to be overturned because of Planned Parenthood v. Casey, or any of the other intermediate steps when we were really fearful Roe would be overturned, the post-Roe environment would look very different. It's really, I don't want to say there's any luck or good of overturning Roe, but we really got lucky in a sense that it happened at this moment where abortion pills had been on the market in the United States for over 2 decades, had become normalized to the point where over 50% of abortions at the last census, and this was a few years before COVID, over 50% of abortions were through abortion pills. And with the FDA changes that I'll talk about, if those hadn't happened, if any of these things hadn't happened, we would be in much different circumstances now. Much more dire circumstances. And not that there aren't major problems right now in the post-Roe world, but it just would look very different if without what we've seen in the past couple decades with the proliferation of pills. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to do some pills basics that a lot of you, I'm sure, know already, but set out some basics about the FDA and pills, and then talk about how both the anti-abortion movement and the abortion rights and justice movement have been battling over pills and the different strategies that they're taking at this point in time around pills. And then sort of wrap up by talking about sort of what this all means about the abortion debate and abortion issues and abortion stigma going forward. So to start with pills, and again, for many of you, most of you, all of you, this is probably familiar material, but when we talk about abortion pills, we're talking about 2 different pills, mifepristone and misoprostol. The 2 drugs taken together are in a regimen where you take one and then you take multiple of the second misoprostol 24 hours later or so. That is the sort of gold standard, is the language used for abortion medication abortion in the United States. Around the world, it's a little different. There are places that use the same regimen, mifepristone followed by misoprostol, but there are a lot of places around the world where they don't use the mifepristone. They use just misoprostol. And that is considered very effective, and there are actually studies showing that maybe it's as effective as mifepristone and misoprostol. However, the studies also show it can take longer for the abortion to be completed, and it can involve more cramping and more bleeding. Now, I'm not going to say one's more preferable than the other, but the American medical sort of establishment believes that mifepristone followed by misoprostol is the gold standard. The 2 drugs are very different in how they're regulated. Mifepristone is approved by the FDA only for abortion. It was approved in 2000, and even though it does have other uses that medical professionals use it for, like miscarriage management and a few other things, it is approved only for abortion. Misoprostol, which is part of the FDA approval of mifepristone, says you then use misoprostol, but misoprostol is not approved for abortion. It's an ulcer drug. And the FDA approved it a long time ago as a drug to treat ulcers. and doctors prescribe it off-label to be a part of the abortion regimen. So they're regulated differently by the FDA, one only for abortion and one for ulcers, but used with the other one as part of the regimen. When the FDA approved it in 2000, the FDA put restrictions on mifepristone that came with the approval. These were not really supported by medical evidence, but they were part of the sort of politicization of this drug. And it made it harder to access the drug because it can only be prescribed by doctors who were certified. And you had to take the pills in the presence of the doctor. You had to have 3 visits with the doctor, one beforehand, one to take the pills, and then a follow-up visit. And they were only prescribable within 7 weeks or up to 7 weeks of pregnancy and at a higher dose than now. The FDA changed this in 2016 and then changed it again in 2021 and then again in 2023. At each step along the way, the FDA got rid of some of those restrictions. So at this point in time, under the FDA regulations, mifepristone is approved, but it is approved and it doesn't have the restrictions of doctor only. Other healthcare practitioners within their scope of care can prescribe mifepristone. It does not have to be taken in person. It can be mailed, and it can be prescribed up to 10 weeks at a lower dose. Those are some of the big changes. The biggest change there is the change that allowed it to be mailed. That meant that people did not have to go to a clinic to get this pill. They could talk to a provider over the phone or over video conferencing, and then that provider could mail them the pill or have a pharmacy, a certified pharmacy, mail them the pills. And this opened up access for a lot of people because they did not have to physically travel to the clinic. And we know that travel can be difficult, expensive, easier for the privileged than others. And so this really opens up a whole new world of access for people. And there's been a lot of sort of entrepreneurial development in terms of making pills accessible to people. There have been virtual clinics that have opened that served, at least before Dobbs, have served all 50 states, or tried to serve all 50 states. And it allows clinics to have partners where people can, or where doctors don't even have to be in the clinic, they can be working from home. It just opens up access in all sorts of ways. And we've seen really incredible innovation with access to pills because of these FDA changes. So that sort of sets the stage. What has happened in response? Well, because of sort of the revolutionary sort of promise and actuality of abortion pills, the anti-abortion movement totally understands what this means for their ultimate goal. And their ultimate goal, I think everyone would agree, is not just to overturn Roe and say, okay, every state, you can choose to have abortion or you could choose to ban abortion. It's up to you. Their ultimate goal is to stop abortion. They realize the risk that pills pose to their ultimate effort. They have, you can find all sorts of statements from anti-abortion movement leaders talking about how they understand that pills are this new frontier of abortion and it requires a new approach, new creative approaches to attack pills. And so I'm going to sort of start by talking about their approaches to attacking pills, and then talk about the abortion rights and justice movement sort of own ideas on trying to spread pills more broadly. And so probably the highest profile attack on pills that's been in the news for the past year has been this challenge in Texas to the approval of mifepristone. So this is a case that was filed in Texas by an anti-abortion group of doctors that was filed before a very anti-abortion judge. And you can find some really interesting writings online by people profiling this judge and just how much a part of the anti-abortion, anti-LGBT movement he is. And they filed this case and they said that the FDA improperly approved this drug back in 2000. So they filed this last November, so 2022. And they said 22 years ago, the FDA improperly approved this drug. And all of the approvals or changes in the requirements that came 2016, 2021, 2022, all of those changes were improper too. The basic idea that they're putting forth is that the FDA just didn't have the science to justify approving the pills, that the pills are not safe, they're not effective, and the studies the FDA relied upon do not support those conclusions. Now, if you're thinking to yourself, I'm not a lawyer, but I certainly understand the idea of a statute of limitations, right? That's something that most people understand. You're absolutely right. This is a major problem with this lawsuit, that they are trying to go back 22 years to overturn a decision from 2000. It is certainly not a coincidence that they filed this in the months following Dobbs, as opposed to filing this back in 2005 or 2001.
I have a question about the filing, David, which is, so everybody like talks about this, it was filed on purpose in Amarillo, Texas, where Judge Kaczmarek is on the bench.
Right.
And they like this, I don't know what they call themselves, this organization that did it, like they formulated just before doing this, they came into existence in order to file this and probably other similar cases, and they judge shopped in order to like do that in this particular place with this wingnut judge. Why doesn't our side do that shit? Can you just go pick where you file your case to get the person who likes your shit? Like,
a good question. So this is the Alliance for Hippocratic Medicine. They are based in Texas, and they filed their case in Amarillo, Texas. That's where they're based, Amarillo, Texas. There's a very particular quirk in the rules about where you file cases in Texas and Texas alone that allows you to sort of pick certain judges in Texas. And this is one of them. So they took advantage of that. And our side does take advantage of this with another judge in Texas. I'm forgetting his name, but he has issued very good decisions on our side in some cases. The problem is the appeal goes to the Fifth Circuit, and the Fifth Circuit's super conservative.
yeah.
So there's a statute of limitations problem. There's also a problem. These doctors have no connection to abortion drugs, other than that they claim that they might eventually see a patient who is suffering complications, and they don't want to have to deal with that because they're anti-abortion. Usually, in most cases, you have to have a much stronger connection to an issue before you bring a case. And usually you're not allowed to bring a case 22 years later. But Judge Kaczmarek, being Judge Kaczmarek, he ruled in April that the FDA improperly approved the drug and really threw everyone for a loop. For a couple of weeks, we weren't sure what was going to happen next, because it was quickly appealed to the Fifth Circuit, who agreed with most of what Judge Kaczmarek said, not all of it. And then it went to the U.S. Supreme Court. And the U.S. Supreme Court issued an emergency stay back in mid-April or late April. The emergency stay says nothing changes until we get this case and decide this case as a final matter. So right now, that's what we're waiting for. The Supreme Court has gotten briefing for the first stage of the case, which is just to determine if they're going to take the case. They are going to decide that maybe next Friday. They are talking about this case for the first time on Friday, December 8th. And we might hear later that day or Monday morning, the 11th, whether the Supreme Court is going to take this case. It might take a lot longer than that. Sometimes they have to meet many times before they decide whether to take a case. But I think either Friday afternoon next week or next Monday morning is the first time we might hear from the court whether they'll take the case. We are hoping they take the case, which is scary because this Supreme Court is the Supreme Court that overturned Roe. If they don't take the case, then the lower court decisions go into effect and FDA regulations get all mixed up and we have to deal with the fallout. The hope is that they take the case and that they rule not necessarily on the FDA issue, but on these other preliminary technical issues. And they say it was filed too late and these doctors have no connection here. That, I think, is the hope. And there's a lot of people who follow the court, both liberal and conservative, who think that's likely, but obviously there's no certainty, especially with this court. But that case poses a real challenge because if the FDA approval of mifepristone goes away, there's a big question about what happens next. And we can talk more about this in the chat, but the FDA technically only regulates the providers of the pills. So Danco and GenBioPro are the companies that distribute and market the pills. They are the ones regulated by the FDA, not doctors and not other people who have the pills. That's governed by state law. But what the FDA would do in response to a ruling that they are no longer approving this drug is no longer approved is a big question mark. Just think of the fact that the FDA doesn't have to enforce the law, just like a police officer who sees you jaywalk doesn't have to enforce the laws against jaywalking. The FDA has options. And so what exactly would happen following this case is a big question mark. If somehow mifepristone does go away, there's always misoprostol, because this case does not affect misoprostol in any way whatsoever. And doctors could start going to, and other medical care providers could start going to the misoprostol regimen that other countries use. But this case, if the Supreme Court does not make this case go away one way or the other, it could really disrupt pills. But I don't think it will end pills, because misoprostol will still be out there, and misoprostol is much cheaper, much more widely available, and not at all threatened by this case.
And of course, as you'll get to, I think shortly, something ceasing to be legal or accessible in medical environments does not mean it is unavailable.
Correct. Now that could be if the companies stop producing it or something, right? And then it becomes hard to import from other countries. Right. Obviously, that could become difficult. But yes.
It seems like most people believe that they aren't going to want to mess with Miffy because it is with miso, because it's of such a broad utility that there's just like it would just be crazy to take that out of the equation. And with Miffy, or just that the market is so saturated that it would be somewhat pointless. And with Miffy, my hope is sort of that it's of so much utility beyond abortion with respect to miscarriage management, especially that like these Republican lawmakers don't want like nice white ladies dying of sepsis because their doctor wouldn't give them like Miffy to help with miscarriage management in the Deep South.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly going to be part of the argument, is thinking about what it would mean for other care, because mifepristone is not approved for miscarriage management. People have tried, but it's right. not. So if it would, the approval would go away for everything.
Right.
So you're right that is one of the threats. So the next threat that with respect to pills that you may be hearing a lot about, and depending on who wins the presidency, we may hear even more about, is the Comstock Act. The Comstock Act is a law from 1873. You heard me right, 1873, 150 years ago, written by Anthony Comstock, the notorious anti-vice, anti-contraception, anti-woman crusader of that era. And he was against obscenity, and he didn't want obscenity and contraception and abortion, anything related to abortion, to be sent through the mails.
Also, David, real quick, did you know that Anthony Comstock was like a tortured chronic masturbator?
Yes, I have read that too. Yes.
Go ahead and tack that onto his future bio.
So the Comstock Act is something you learn about in history books. The crazy thing about it is it's never been repealed. As much as Anthony Comstock...
Why is that? Why is it that our side does not do that? And like with these zombie laws that are still in the books in the States, where the Democrats are acting like it's like a old box of postcards that they found in the attic of an old house they just bought, when it's like actually some insane archaic law that's going to criminalize free speech. Like, did they just not get ahead of this? How are they surprised?
So I think what happened was, in about the 1920s and 1930s, a bunch of courts, not the Supreme Court, but the lower courts, basically read this law almost out of existence. They basically said that as long as you're providing lawful contraception or abortion or anything else, you can't go after them. And so this law has pretty much been on the books, but not really any enforcement for 100 years. And then there was Roe v. Wade, which also made it so it was hard to enforce the Comstock Act. But what it does is it prohibits mailing anything that can induce an abortion. And it prohibits not only mailing, but also in express mail services like UPS and FedEx. So this law not really no one paid attention to it until after Dobbs. And now there are certain parts of the anti-abortion movement becoming more and more mainstream within the movement who are talking about Comstock. And they're talking about how if we reinvigorate Comstock, it will prohibit anyone from mailing pills. And not only pills, but it will also prohibit anyone from mailing instruments that are used in abortion clinics. It could basically, the hope is from some of these anti-abortion folks that it will shut down all abortion in the country. Right now, there's a couple reasons why we don't have to worry about it. One, the court decisions that are out there. But two, we have President Biden with the DOJ. It's a federal law, and the Department of Justice, the federal Department of Justice would enforce it. And so the Biden DOJ is not going to enforce this law. But if we have a new president, a Republican anti-abortion president, we could have a DOJ that wants to enforce the Comstock Act, and then we would have to deal with trying to convince the courts that this old law shouldn't apply anymore. And the US Supreme Court ultimately would probably get involved in this. Another part of the anti-abortion strategy with pills is trying to say that the location of where an abortion happens is actually much different than where people might think it is. So think of someone who travels from, say, Mississippi to Illinois to get abortion pills, and they get the pills in Illinois, and they take the Miffy, the first part of the pills, in Illinois. But then they go back home, they drive home, and then 24 hours later, they take the misoprostol. Where does the abortion take place? A lot of people would think the abortion takes place where they got the care, where they were physically present when they got the pills from the doctor. There are anti-abortion attorney generals and lawyers who are trying to argue that if any part of the abortion takes place in the state, if any part of the pill ingestion takes place in our state, or even if it's not the pill ingestion, the expulsion of the products of conception, if that happens in our state, then we can have jurisdiction over you and prosecute either you or someone who helped you, or even the provider who provided the pills in another state. So there's a lot of I think one of the things the anti-abortion movement has done post-Dobbs is create a lot of uncertainty with where an abortion happens when it comes to pills. And some clinics, some providers adopted very conservative rules with respect to their own thinking about risk when it comes to the location of abortion, because they don't want to get caught up in the any legal problems as a result. Abortion pills make the question of the abortion or location of the abortion really tricky, because you can imagine someone being in many different states for all the different steps, right? The doctor's in one state, they're in another state when they have their conversation. They're going to a friend's house, so they have the pills mailed to a friend's house, and that friend's house is in a third state. They take the first pill in a fourth state. They take the second pills in a fifth state. They expel the products of conception in a sixth state. Which of those states is where the abortion takes place? Which of those states is the one that has jurisdiction? And all it takes is one of those states to have some kind of threat that is where the abortion takes place. And now you get people sort of chilling their activity, whether it's the person getting the abortion or the provider. And that's a real challenge right now. We don't have any answers to these questions. We don't have any cases explaining which one is the right view, who's got it right here.
And because it's all just arbitrary, it's like it's not, I think that like the flip side of what you're saying, which you definitely say in this paper, is that pills have the potential to like decouple abortion from location in a way that is fundamentally like irrepressible.
Right. And that's why we're seeing such a proliferation. And I think this is both an ambiguity that the anti-abortion movement is trying to exploit to chill people and scare people, right, but the pro-choice movement is exploiting to try and have pills proliferate. And I think actually our side's winning in this regard, but it's certainly part of their strategy. A couple other things on their side, and then I'll switch sides here. There's efforts to try and chill information exchange. So, websites like Shout Your Abortion or Plan C or any other website that has information about abortion pills. There are some states that are thinking about what we can do to try and stop those websites from having that information in our states. And obviously this raises serious First Amendment issues. And I'm sure we're going to see some of those challenges in the future. And then the final one I'll talk about is one obviously, that gets in the news every now and then, is you see states that are targeting individuals who use pills. And we see the case out of Nebraska, which, was a case that the young woman and her mother obtained the pills before Roe was overturned. So this is a pre-Dobbs case. Although the prosecution happened afterwards, but they got pills online, and the police got access to their Facebook messages and prosecuted them, not for an abortion crime, but for other crimes. Improper disposal of a fetus, improper ordering or delivery of drugs. And so those kind of crimes occasionally get prosecuted. And if, when, how, and pregnancy justice have great resources on those kinds of things. And so that is a continued threat and concern around pills. The abortion rights and justice movement has its responses or other ideas on how to expand pills. And so some of those have been really powerful in this post-Dobbs environment. And I think actually, like I said, these efforts are the ones that seem to be winning right now. Probably the boldest effort going on right now is a change in telehealth rules that 6 states have engaged in under the guise of what are called shield laws. So New York, Massachusetts, Washington, California, Vermont, and Colorado have all passed laws that say that their providers will not get into any legal trouble with their state if they prescribe pills into another state using telehealth where the doctor doesn't have a license and where it's illegal to have an abortion in those states. So for instance, a New York doctor in New York with a New York license, with an Alabama patient physically located in Alabama, they can connect through telehealth, and that New York provider can mail pills to that Alabama patient to get abortion pills. The shield laws have been in operation. Well, the Massachusetts one was in operation a year ago, but really the New York law took effect in June. And since June, the estimates are that over 5,000 packets of pills a month are being sent by these doctors in these various states to people in states with bans. And frankly, that number has probably gone higher because that estimate was given to me in September. To be clear, what these laws do, they do not change the fact that Alabama sees this as illegal. Nothing New York, California, or any other state can do can change what Alabama thinks about what's happening. But the states where the shield laws are, where the doctor or the medical care provider is located, will not take any legal action against that provider for prescribing in this manner. And so the providers doing this are sort of making a choice. They are saying, I am comfortable living my life in my state. I am not going to travel to these other states where I risk getting arrested or sued. And I am confident or confident enough that the authorities in my state are not going to come after me. And I'm using that sort of cocoon of being in my state to care for people in states who can't get it. And this is so revolutionary because it means people are able to get medically supervised care without leaving their state where abortion is banned. And just the numbers show you that lots of people are taking advantage of this. A couple other things. So there are people who are experimenting with missed period pills and advanced provision of abortion pills. And I talk about them together because they both sort of take advantage of the same loophole, which is that abortion laws, for the most part, require someone to know that someone is pregnant. So it's basically saying you are violated the law if you you terminate a pregnancy that is clinically diagnosed by you. The idea of missed period pills is that people get these abortion pills without a positive pregnancy test. So they may have missed their period, suspect they may be pregnant, but don't get a positive pregnancy test. And there's no medical care provider who does a pregnancy test and finds positive. So they give them the pills and they say, these pills will help you get your period. In doing so, there's sort of a wink, wink, nudge, nudge that, sorry, that's a phone ringing. There's a wink, wink, nudge, nudge that you may be pregnant, you may not be. because there's all sorts of reasons people miss their period. But you may be pregnant, and so if you take these pills, you should get your period back. But we're not violating the law because there's no one that knows that you're pregnant. Advanced provision is similar. Advanced provision, that idea is the same idea as going to the store and buying Advil before you have a headache, right? So you buy Advil in the possibility that you're going to have a headache sometime later in life, and you're going to want the Advil in your medicine cabinet when you have that headache or other need for Advil. Advanced provision is the same idea, that someone who is reproductive age says, I might get pregnant. I want these pills in my medicine cabinet in case I do. And so a doctor or other medical care provider provides these pills to that patient before they know they're pregnant. And in doing so, again, takes advantage of the legal loophole that they are providing the pills without knowing that someone is pregnant. There are providers who are taking advantage of these options, not to the best of my knowledge, in any banned states, but in other states, and they are providing the pills to people in the states where there are bans. The final option, and I don't know of any state exploring this option, but I think it would be a fantastic one, is pharmacist prescription of abortion pills. Pharmacists have been given authority through various legal methods to prescribe birth control pills in, I think it's now dozens of states, where the pharmacist basically has the authority under a supervising doctor to prescribe birth control pills without someone having to go to a doctor to get that. There are opportunities to develop the same model with abortion pills. And a really creative, advanced thinking state could try to do something like that with abortion pills. And it would just make it that much more accessible to get pills, because you could go to your local pharmacist rather than go to an abortion provider or call an abortion provider who may be in a place where you can't get or you don't want to talk to. So I want to just say a few sort of big picture things, what all this means before opening up to questions. I think that the power of abortion pills, there's really sort of many different things that this really is a game changer for abortion. And so one of them is that abortion pills really sort of have the potential of removing the medical gatekeeper, removing the professional gatekeeper, because what I haven't talked about is the proliferation of informal networks that are distributing pills outside of the traditional legal medical healthcare system. That is proliferating all over the country. And you can find, things like Red State Access, Access MA, We Save Us, and others that are adopting models of saying, well, we're getting pills, however we're getting pills, whether it's from Mexico, whether it's from India, whether it's from providers, somehow we're getting pills ourselves. We are not medical care providers, and we are going to be there for people in our community who need these pills. And we are just going to get them in the hands of people. Because this is not a medical procedure, and we know that abortions happen procedurally outside of the medical system too, with people self-taught abortion, right? But that was certainly very rare under Roe v. Wade, and we don't know anything about what's happening now other than sort of anecdotally. But pills are widely available. It does not take any medical expertise to say, hey, here are some pills that can help you. Take this one and then take these 24 hours later. And actually, if you want to know exactly how to do it, there's all sorts of videos online to show you exactly how to do it. Abortion pills remove the gatekeeper of a medical professional environment from the abortion procedure or abortion availability. And in a way that really sort of can radically change healthcare, or this form of healthcare in this country. And it's one of the really wild things about pills. You see this around in other parts of the world, where abortion becomes something that really becomes decoupled from the medical establishment. Now, of course, there are going to be people who need abortions in traditional healthcare facilities and with doctors, or people who are just more comfortable with getting their care from doctors or nurse practitioners or anyone else. This is not a substitute for all abortion care, but with the wide proliferation of pills, both in and outside of the traditional medical environment, we are seeing a real challenge to what we have previously thought of as sort of the understanding of how healthcare works and how reproductive healthcare works. It's empowering, it's feminist, it's ground up instead of top down. And abortion pills really sort of facilitate that big change in abortion delivery. Another thing that we're seeing is that it really sort of challenges our notion of the definition of what an abortion is. When the body's process of using pills really mimics a natural miscarriage, it really sort of blends what we're thinking of. What is abortion? What is miscarriage? What are other pregnancy outcomes? And I think in a way that, coupled with the sort of proliferation of pills and commonness of pills, helps fight abortion stigma. When you can't really differentiate what's happening to someone's body between natural miscarriage and abortion pills, it really can, just become such a common part of someone's life cycle that we can talk about it differently. It's not this scary thing where you go into a clinic that's surrounded by protesters that, for all the reasons that we're all familiar with, maybe an environment that wonderful people try to make as hospitable as possible, but can be scary for some people. This can happen in your home. It is private, on your own terms. And that way, and it doesn't have any of the sort of the much of what the anti-abortion movement has done is characterize abortion providers as ghouls, the procedure as grisly, and it's not. Like with pills, it's just not. For some people, it's a heavy period, and to sort of demonize that is much harder. Certainly, they'll try, but it's much harder. And then finally, I just want to touch on the criminalization issue, which is that we certainly have to be wary of who might be criminalized in a context where abortion pills proliferate, especially in states with bans. It is obvious to probably everyone on this call that, when anything's involved with the criminal justice system, the people who are most likely to be targeted are poor people, women of color, people without immigration status, all of the things that make someone marginalized in this country and a target for criminal justice enforcement. And we've seen that with people who have been criminalized. So we always have to be wary of what's going to happen in a world with criminalization. But at the same time, when you think about how many pills are out there and the reality of stopping drugs, right? We have something similar to this. The country has tried to stop drugs for a century. It has failed miserably. Same thing with abortion pills. They're out there. They are being distributed, both legal and illegal means, unlawful means, informal means, formal means. They are being distributed. People are getting pills. And it's not going to be stopped, just like illegal narcotics are not going to be stopped. But there will be people who get caught up in the criminal justice system because of it, just like with the war on drugs, right? Yes, drugs can be probably obtained anywhere you want, but we know lots of people have been put in jail as a result, and it's had racially disproportionate effects, and it's really ruined people's lives. So we have to, while abortion pills proliferate, we also have to keep our eye on who is going to be caught up by the criminal justice system, provide support for those people, prevention to try and make sure it doesn't happen in the first place, and really keep our eye on the ball that we don't repeat what happened under the war on drugs, which is that we filled our jails with people of color, usually men of color, and whole communities suffered as a result. So we really have to sort of keep our eye on that risk long-term, while also celebrating the reality that, they can throw almost anything at us and abortion pills aren't going away.
Yeah, the war on drugs didn't work. It only worked to reinforce these existing inequalities, which we know is like part of the point.
Yep.
That was so awesome. There's a cat making a cameo. This is Russell.
Hi, Russell.
We have some questions in the chat, lots of questions already, which is exciting. And thank you, David. That was awesome. I have one question to start us out, which is sort of tangentially related to what you were just talking about. So there's obviously a difference between anti-choice operatives and just like rank and file Republican lawmakers who probably aren't really that invested in whether or not abortion happens. Maybe they've paid for some of them. They probably don't give a shit if it goes away or not. They're more concerned with getting reelected and with like the broader, I think, project of like entrenching patriarchal Christian corporate rule in this country, white, of course. And, you know, there's a big disparity between like how hard the anti-choice movement wants to go and how hard the average Republican lawmaker or voter wants to go. And we've seen Dobbs be so deeply unpopular. We've watched all of these states like either, you know, approve ballot measures that reaffirm abortion rights or shut down anti-abortion stuff like at the ballot box every time. And Republicans are taking note of this. What I wonder is how much do you foresee anti-choice movement forces leaning on Republican lawmakers to crack down on distribution? Because what we've seen so far, the few people that have faced prosecution in post-Dobbs America have been folks who had abortions or and in that case, they were charged with something like abuse of a corpse or whatever, or someone like a mother in Nebraska who helped their kid obtain abortion pills, and it was like an aiding and abetting thing. We haven't seen Republicans proactively cracking down on informal distribution networks. And as David has said, as everybody on this call probably knows, these networks are out there. They are often public facing to some degree. They are accessible via social media, via Proton Mail accounts. They're out there and they are becoming a backbone of post-Dobbs access. How much do you foresee that kind of crackdown happening? And how much do you think of that as being contingent on results of the 2024 election?
Yeah, well, so that last part, I think the 2024 election could really change it because of the Comstock Act and because you might have a Department of Justice who wants to go after this. You might not, though, for all the reasons you stated, right? There's some sense that the people in charge, right, the people who have the positions to wield actual power, that they might be satisfied with Roe being overturned, with the public statement that sends, and not having to do the politically unpopular thing of going after abortion.
Right.
You know, if you had asked me 18 months ago, I would not have thought that true. But 18 months in, we're not seeing like waves of prosecutions or waves of investigations. Now that could all change tomorrow, right? I don't know the future. But we're not seeing a mass effort to stop what's happening here. Certainly, there have been some little things like Jonathan Mitchell, the guy in Texas, has filed a lawsuit against a couple people who use pills. But that's real isolated.
Felt pretty symbolic up to this point, and
right.
Not like they're practically trying to stop it from happening.
Yeah, so I don't know. It's been a big surprise. And so maybe there is this sort of sense, especially watching the ballot initiatives that have happened and the upset elections, that going too fast to try and impose the most pain would not be in their interests. But I don't know. It could change.
So I'm going to start asking you some questions from the chat. One that feels related to this particular thread is, do you see any particular concerns for folks providing non-medical, parentheses, escort, doula, driver, family support to someone having a medication abortion? And are there differences between in-person support or virtual support?
Well, so the latter, no. There's no difference between in-person or virtual support, although one might be easier to detect, right? Mm-hmm. All of that would be under the guise of aiding and abetting or some kind of assistance. And, you know, the Texas law that was passed a couple of years ago, SB 8, I think got people a little confused about aiding and abetting law because everyone, you know, that was in the law, SB 8. And so people were thinking, oh, Texas is unusual. Every state has aiding and abetting laws, right? If I rob a bank and you help me rob the bank, but you don't go in to rob the bank, you are still guilty of robbing the bank because you aided and abetted me. Every state has aiding and abetting. And it's just how broad that would be interpreted. I think someone who helps someone, whether virtual, in person, any of the ways that you just mentioned, you know, you could see an aggressive prosecutor go after that, but you haven't yet.
Yeah.
We've seen, that Idaho case that just came out a couple weeks ago with they're prosecuting someone for kidnapping a minor across state lines. So that was someone who provided assistance, right? He drove
Right.
her across state lines. But there's some wild facts in that case. And obviously, wild facts happen in terms of people's lives
Yeah.
are messy.
Totally.
Um,
Totally. But it
but
was an
that one,
unusual case. Yeah.
but yeah,
It was
but
an unusual case.
generally, we haven't
Yeah.
seen people who are
Right.
helping, suffer any legal consequences.
But we have seen these aiding and abetting laws have an unbelievable chilling effect
Correct.
on the infrastructure of abortion access, i.e. in Texas, where SB 8 essentially shut down, in-clinic abortion care a year or whatever before Dobbs. And that's
Right.
the intent. Like the intent of aiding and abetting laws is to make people afraid to help one another, which is, part of the reason why SYA was so excited to rally behind our promise to do that, with that very language. And I think that, we just saw a study come out. We're seeing the first data on abortion access post Dobbs. And what we're seeing is essentially that abortion went down in the states where it was banned, and it went up in the states that it wasn't. And it essentially stayed the same or went up, meaning that grassroots activists and these networks of abortion funds, practical support organizations, independent clinics who are like fighting so hard to like help people coordinate travel and get across state lines, organizations like SYA and Plan C and folks who are elevating information about getting pills in the mail, regardless of legality, how to protect yourself from digital surveillance, all of the things. Like these things are all working, and there is a cobbled together system of access that is functionally making Dobbs, it's undercutting the impact of this legislation, or not legislation, this ruling, which is just all the reason we need to double down. And I think that so I want to ask another question from the chat. Somebody asked, I read that a few anti-choice AGs filed to join the Miffy lawsuit. Does that make it more likely that SCOTUS will delay taking up review of the case?
Yeah, this is a big sort of source of who knows. 3 states, Missouri, Kansas, and one other state, attorney generals filed saying that they can be a part of this case. They can be a plaintiff. They filed really late. It's very odd to file at this point in time, and we don't know what effect that's going to have, because their filing technically is in the lower court, not in the Supreme Court. So we don't know if the Supreme Court is going to wait for that to happen and get figured out whether they can even join the case before the Supreme Court addresses the issue, or if the Supreme Court's going to operate sort of as if that isn't happening. Mm-hmm. I've talked to different Supreme Court experts who have different views on that, what the effect will be. But I think what that shows, and I'm glad you brought that up, I think those state attorney generals recognize the weakness of the claim by the doctors. They are basically saying, yeah, we realize that the doctors' claim to bring this case is really weak, so we are going to bring it, and we have some special powers as states. I don't know if I still don't think it's strong enough, but they definitely have a stronger claim that they can bring cases on behalf of the people who live in their states who are being injured. I still think it's not enough, but it's certainly more than the doctors.
David, feel free to get into this chat and look at what questions feel most like pertinent to you.
Yeah, there's a couple questions about the SHIELD laws. So the one question asks if the SHIELD laws protect the providers from extradition, and that's exactly right. So the Constitution requires extradition if you physically flee the state. So if you go to Texas, you commit a crime, and then you go to, New York, and you were in Texas when you allegedly committed that crime, New York has no choice whatsoever. They have to send you to Texas to be tried. There is no wavering, no optionality there. It's just New York has to do that. That's the extradition that's required by the Constitution. What the SHIELD laws say is that if the person was never in that state, never physically in that state, we are not going to extradite them. That is optional under the Constitution. And states have passed laws on their own saying we will extradite in those situations. So say you commit a crime in New York by calling someone in Texas, and now you are accused of assisting someone with planning a bank robbery, say in Texas. New York has a law from like the 50s or 60s that says we will extradite you. The Shield laws say not if it's a reproductive health care related case. And that is absolutely constitutional. There's no constitutional problem with the states opting out of that type of extradition because that person was never in the state of Texas. So think of the doctor who's located in New York who has a telehealth visit with a patient in Texas. That doctor never stepped foot in Texas. And even though they connected with someone in Texas virtually or on the phone, that is not physical presence. So New York does not have to extradite them. They can, but they don't have to. And the Shield laws say we won't. So that part, it certainly upsets a basic understanding of how things work in this country. There's a lot of reasons why we on the left would want states to cooperate with each other, but the Shield laws are basically states saying because of the dire circumstances right now, we are not going to cooperate when it comes to trying to attack our healthcare providers. And so there was a similar question about whether these are constitutional, and I answered the basic constitutional question there, and whether antis are going to challenge.
David, just so you know, the folks can't see you might want to read the question because.
Oh, sorry. Do you think telemedicine abortion provider Shield laws are constitutional? Do you anticipate that antis will try to challenge these laws? And so I do think they will try to challenge these laws, but I also think they're constitutional for the reason I just stated with respect to extradition. There are some, I'm not going to say all Shield laws everywhere are constitutional because there are some variations, some that I think are a little problematic, not with respect to extradition, but with respect to lawsuits from other states. But that's getting into the weeds. The general idea of Shield laws, they don't really raise any constitutional problems because states get to determine how they want to run their own criminal justice system or their own civil justice system. And if the states and their own medical boards and their own malpractice insurance companies, if the states want to say, we do not want to participate in out-of-state investigations with our law enforcement, with our extradition process, with our criminal subpoena process, and our deposition process, states can say that. They may have blowback with respect to now, if there's a lawsuit in Texas around guns, Texas, in New York about guns, Texas may say, we don't want to cooperate with that either. But the states are willing to make that sort of risk, take that risk on because they see the importance of reproductive health care at this point in time. I don't know. Do you want to pick one, Amelia?
I really like, so this is like a less wonky, a more sort of top level movement question. Can you speak to why there is still so much confusion about the legality of SMA and the individual's right to access pills online and by mail? If When How has published repeated statements that the vast majority of states have no laws criminalizing self-managed abortion, yet organizations continue to publish maps of abortion being banned in half the country without clarification about SMA, let alone that Shield law providers are now serving those states with no additional legal risk to end users/patients. Of course, criminalization can happen regardless, but this feels like something that needs addressing within the movement ASAP to understand concerns and misalignment and to be able to move forward together. Thoughts?
Yeah, I got a lot of thoughts on this one. So there's a lot of confusion around some of the particularities here. It is true that only 2 states, and actually I think one state just repealed it. It might just be one state whose abortion law covers the person taking pills or some other form of abortion. And so 49 states, it is not the person who has the abortion who is criminalized by the abortion law. Nonetheless, there are other laws that states have used to prosecute those people that have nothing to do with abortion. So drug delivery to a minor, for instance, that law was not put on the books to stop abortion. But the Alabama Attorney General said, maybe we can use the law around drug delivery to a minor because we here in Alabama think a fetus is a minor and someone taking abortion pills is delivering drugs to that minor through the umbilical cord and the placenta, et cetera. So we can use that law. And we've seen that happen, that states have used those laws. And so laws like that, or what we talked about, abuse of a corpse, In Pennsylvania, we had someone prosecuted for unlawful pharmacology because she got pills for her daughter and gave her daughter pills, and she's not a pharmacist. So prosecutors have used these laws. So the risk is that other laws. That being said, the numbers are concerning in the sense that you don't want anyone prosecuted, but you compare the numbers of people prosecuted to the number of people who have used pills, been pregnant, had adverse pregnancy outcomes. The denominator in that equation is really high. And the top level number, the numerator is low. And so it is absolutely important to focus on the people who have been caught up in the criminal justice system. But at the same time, it's important, I think, to convey the relative risk of that happening, which is quite low. Again, the fact that it's quite low doesn't mean we shouldn't be concerned about it. We should. But the fact that it's quite low, I think, should be a part of people's assessment of their own risk and their own understanding of risk. And I think there are a lot of people who are looking at those numbers and saying, I can distribute pills, I can take pills, I can make sure that people I know have pills. And they are looking at this and saying, my risk of prosecution is low. It's kind of the same thing when someone drives 65 and a 55, right? You are recognizing you are violating some law. There's a risk that you could be pulled over, and maybe because of your skin color or because of how your car looks, you have a higher risk, but everyone does their own risk assessment in that regard, recognizing that maybe what they're doing is technically illegal, but they're doing it anyway.
And the fact that the speed limit is 60 doesn't mean your car can't go 90. Like,
right,
we all
exactly.
know that, like, the law does not determine what is actually possible.
Right.
And that if you're like in a really big hurry, you're going to speed. And if
Right.
you're pregnant and you don't want to be, you will probably like consider something like popping pills outside of a medical establishment. That might feel like a really reasonable option to you. And it might, or it will be, a relatively safe one.
Yeah, and lots of people are obviously making that their own assessment in that regard and choosing to get pills.
Yeah, and like I think we have to talk about the risk of getting and using pills alongside the risk of continuing an unwanted
100%.
pregnancy, especially in a southern state, especially for, you know, a marginalized person.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that also, you know, there is danger in emphasizing, like, being so obsessed with talking about risk that we deter people from what is ultimately a relatively safe option to end a pregnancy. I think that, like, the, you know, the bigger problem to me, like on the numbers, feels like people don't, not enough people know that abortion pills are safe and effective, even when used outside of a doctor's office. And even if you acquire them outside of, you know, a traditional medical channel, and say from an online pill distributor or from a community network, and maybe you call the miscarriage and abortion hotline, or, you know, you consult other sort of hotlines and stuff like that, instead of like a traditional path through a medical system. People need to know that that is a medically safe option and that the legal risk is relatively low.
Yes.
Like, part of what our side does in this respect sometimes feels like it's mimicking what the other side has done by pushing this into this, like, abortion is so scary and fucked up and isolated, and abortion, like, I think the more that we talk about it as if it's something that absolutely has to be terrifying, the more we sort of prop up that reality. And I think we can be really up top, like at the top level, we can say, this is a thing that can be done safely, and shout it from the rooftops, while the actual thing itself, the abortion part or the aiding and abetting part, is done with a lot of planning and precaution and knowledge of what laws may be broken. And that part is quiet, you know?
Yeah, and I think I think we've seen a big change in this regard in the past couple of years, right? The reality is that, you know, at least for the first year after Dobbs and continuing to this day, you know, it's hard to open up any website that covers the news and not see stories about abortion. Abortion is being normalized in a way that I don't think we ever saw before, just by the fact that it's being talked about all the time, and not just by people
And
like us, right?
pills,
It's being
just
talked about
pills
by
too.
everyone. And
Yeah,
I think that, there's some sense that Amelia talked about the numbers post Dobbs showing that there's been an increase in abortions in a bunch of states. And some of that is just because people are hearing about abortion a lot more. There's a
yeah,
lot more people learning about pills, learning about clinics, learning about how safe and effective it is. And it's becoming normalized in a way. And the more people who use pills, the more information that's out there, the more they become seen by everyone as safe and effective. And absolutely, that has to be the top line message at all times, that pills are safe, they are effective, and people can use them very easily. Again, not without, for some people, some serious cramping and bleeding, but it will go away and you will no longer be pregnant.
yeah.
And so that message, as much as it absolutely needs to get out more, it's getting out now a lot more than it had been a couple of years ago. And it's really great to see.
This is a sort of niche question that I think is interesting. Since the FDA has approved mifepristone for the treatment of Cushing's disease, could a clinician prescribe this medication off-label for abortion if the antis succeeded in Alliance for Hippocratic Medicine, which is the FDA case? There's no REMS for Korlym, which is this Cushing's disease med. The dosage is higher, 300 milligrams, and it's expensive, but could it be done?
In theory, yes. In reality, it's really difficult because it's not just more expensive, it is hella more expensive.
Uh-huh.
And Korlym is about $600+ per pill.
Oh, wow.
And you have to buy a whole month's supply at a time through an
Gotcha.
agreement between the FDA and the distributor of Korlym. So you would have to front $18,000 as a provider in order to get 30 Korlym pills.
Mhm.
And
It's the
so
same constitutionally as, I mean, in terms
it
of
is the
it's
exact same drug. It is mifepristone.
it's literally just a different dosage.
It's a different dosage, different pill, different distributor. So it's approved separately.
Right.
So yes, Korlym, you can always prescribe off-label,
Mhm.
but prescribing Mizo off-label is so easy because it's
Yeah.
widely available, it is super cheap, and it's everywhere. Korlym
Yeah.
is through one pharmacy only. There's one pharmacy that distributes Korlym, and at $18,000 per order, at least. So that is really difficult
Yeah.
to translate into abortion care.
This is another fairly niche medication question. Vermont's Abortion Shield Bill H.89 amendment includes medication that was approved by the US FDA for the termination of a pregnancy as of January 1st, 2023, regardless of the medication's current FDA approval status. Can other states use similar strategies to protect mifepristone use?
So the Vermont Shield Law is unique in that provision, but it doesn't. What it says is that we in Vermont will not punish anyone for prescribing mifepristone in a way that was consistent with the FDA's approvals through January 1st, 2023. Basically saying Vermont will take no action based on what was legal in January of 2023. That means nothing for the FDA approval and the fact that the companies, Denko and GenBioPro, will follow the FDA, maybe, probably, in terms of what's approved and what restrictions they have. They are not covered by Vermont. So yes, if a provider gets mifepristone, after, say that if we lose the FDA case and a provider in Vermont gets mifepristone, then yes, Vermont law will protect them. But it's the getting the mifepristone in the first place from the distributors that would be hard, because probably they will take, if the FDA says we're going to crack down on you now because it's unapproved, those distributors are going to make it more difficult to get.
This is a pretty general question that I think is interesting. Some RJ orgs are running awareness campaigns about liberating abortion pills the same way that Plan B and birth control have been liberated to be sold over the counter. Do you see a future where abortion pills could be available over the counter, and what would need to happen to get us there?
Yeah, I mean, so that would be certainly a huge step forward. Given the long, winding, difficult road to get birth control pills over the counter, which I know it was approved, but I don't know if we've actually seen that happen yet on the ground.
Mhm.
But just one pill of the many
Yeah,
different options, right? It's going to be an even more difficult road for abortion pills. But I do think that should be in the conversation for our ultimate
yeah,
goal, right? One of the great things that the anti-abortion movement did in terms of their strategy was they talked about wild, crazy goals,
yeah,
even if that was never going to happen. Although, their ultimate goal was to overturn Roe, and that just happened. But they were talking about it for years when it obviously wasn't going to happen because
yeah.
they had the long strategy, the long game in mind, and they were totally comfortable with putting out those long game goals,
Right.
even though they knew now we're not going to get it. We need to be better at doing that. We need to be talking about over the counter abortion pills, and have that as a long term goal, knowing it's not going to happen tomorrow, but certainly make that part of the conversation. So I love this idea. It's, my co-authors and I talk about it a little bit in our paper, because it is safe, it is effective. There have been some studies of it, and people know how to use it. It can be used safely in this way. And that's ultimately where we could go.
And I would love for it to go even a step further and have abortion pills just be around, like Narcan has started to be
Yeah.
around,
Yeah.
or Plan B, which is now around. I mean, at least in my community, it's like very common to see Plan B, just a pile of free Plan
Right.
B at some community
Yep.
health center, or someone whose kids,
Libraries,
yeah, whatever. It's just around. And Narcan is around, and I have Narcan, even though I'm not an opioid user, but it's just something that's in my medicine cabinet, and it's something that makes me feel prepared to help the people in my life be safe.
yeah.
And I think that one of the ways that our side failed is by framing and allowing abortion to be framed as this private, individual, secret issue that is like one person's choice, and this choice framing is this very consumer framework, as opposed to a fundamental matter of justice that concerns absolutely everyone.
Yeah.
And if you put yourself in that headspace, it's like a ridiculous thing to imagine like cisgendered men saying, oh, I have nothing, like the good ones who are like pro-choice saying, oh, I have nothing to say about that. Like we need you to have something to say about that. Like, because what we're talking about is a fundamental matter of who our society allows to be free and exercise self-determination and live free in their bodies. And I think that we are in this like moment of watching society move really quickly on this issue. I mean, when I think about like when SYA took abortion pills on the steps of the Supreme Court on the opening argument of Dobbs on December 1st in 2021, that was like people, I think it was clear what we were doing with that action symbolically. We were standing in front of the court, just being like, you will never stop this from happening, and we're doing it in your front yard. And I think when I think back to just where abortion pills sat in the cultural, like in our cultural mind versus like where it is now, it's just a world of difference.
Yeah. No, the culture shift has been massive and it's been quick. And I don't think we would have had the same culture shift on abortion if it
Yeah,
weren't for pills, right? Like
totally.
if it were
Like you alluded to in the beginning of when you were talking, like that all of this happened in such a wild way where it was like the pandemic made
right.
the FDA relax the REMS, and then also simultaneously the pandemic made it so that all of these telemedicine providers started really getting their shit dialed in across services, but especially abortion stuff. And so like right in time, and then also all these community networks popping up, which I think is part of the offshoot of just like flooding the zone. Like as pills become liberated from these narrow pathways, those pathways just sort of start self-proliferating. And then we have a situation where right in time for the Supreme Court to overturn Roe versus Wade, pills are fucking everywhere.
Yeah,
and
Dobbs couldn't have happened at a worse time for the anti-abortion movement.
yeah, I mean, and I wonder if they're looking at this data that just came out that basically says Well, actually, David, this would be a great time to ask you about your new book.
Yeah, so I have a new book that will come out in a year and a half with Carole Joffe. The title is inspired by Amelia, which is We're Doing It Anyway, How the Supreme Court Ended Roe, but Not Abortion. And it's really the story of, yes, there have been some terrible effects of Dobbs with clinic closures in states where we need clinics. But because of the incredible work of abortion providers, abortion supporters, funders, practical support organizations, innovation in care, abortion pills, informal networks, we are seeing an expansion of abortion in this country overall, even while certainly lots of people are not getting the care they need, but as an overall matter, we're seeing expansion of abortion. And I think the anti-abortion movement is sort of being caught off guard by what they've sort of unleashed. At the same time, we're seeing, some of the more conservative states in the country voting for abortion rights. And next year, we might see the same thing with, we're 7 for 7 in ballot initiatives. And next year, there could be another 5 to 10. I'm not happy about Dobbs in any way, overturning Roe. There is no substitute for a national right. But what they've unleashed is really powerful. And we're seeing people do things and take actions that, and pay attention to things that we've been begging for them for decades to pay attention to. And now people are paying attention. And the results have been really, again, not for everyone. There's absolutely people left behind. And one thing that's really important is that it takes a lot of money and resources, people's time. And if that dries up, everything that we're talking about in terms of the post-Dobbs changes could go backwards. But with the time and with the resources people are devoting to it right now, we are seeing an expansion of abortion in this country. And the pills part of it is a huge part of it.
And I think, in addition to like money and resources, it's like human beings who, like the people on the front lines, working at abortion funds, working at indie clinics, working at practical support organizations, just movement people working around the clock to help
100%.
folks access, are running themselves into the ground. And, like what we need, and I think what SYA is really interested in helping to cultivate, is a broader base of participation in abortion access at the community level, so that this isn't a project that's sort of specially relegated to activists or abortion fund volunteers, but so that like abortion access, we start to see it as something that there are lots of different ways to plug in, and everybody's going to have different skills, different risk tolerance, different, stuff to bring to the table. Find a way to plug in and do your part, because there is just I think too small of a group of people helping a whole lot of people have abortions. And it's really amazing that it's worked, but we like need not just more money, but we need more hands.
Yeah, absolutely.
This has been awesome. I don't think that I ignored any questions in the chat. I think, David, we would love to have you back again. We were hoping that people would ask some like real activist specific questions, and what happened was a little more wonky, which is totally great too. But we are so like honored, and just having you in our kitchen cabinet, so to speak, makes us just honored and feel empowered to continue doing this work. Your support means the world, and we would love to have you back to talk about some like more, boots on the ground type stuff. Yeah,
absolutely. Anytime. It's always happy to talk with you about this and talk with anyone about this, because, it is because we are talking about it more that, things are progressing in the way they are. So thank you.
Yeah, totally. Thank you so much, David. Thank you everybody for being here. We will be back next month, and I'm spacing right now on who our next guest is. Michelle, can you remind me in the chat?
Yes, it's Vitala.
Yes. Okay. So there's an amazing app that's it's called, what is it called, Michelle?
Aya Contigo.
Aya Contigo, and it's like basically the accompaniment model, which was developed in Argentina, and is essentially like people being doulas for each other and for pregnant people. This app was developed for Venezuelans, and it's now coming to the United States. There's a couple of amazing research and development folks who are going to be joining us to talk about the research that they put into developing this and to adapting it for the United States, where it's now available. And it's going to be a cool one. So thank you, everybody, for being here, for all of your great questions. Thank you, David, for everything. And we'll see you next month.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.